some people are born with all these good qualities from day one. Is that purely due to their samsaric training? I think it's going to be a mixture, because they'll be influenced by their past karma, but then what's currently happening is going to influence them too. So a person could be, see, and that's what makes it hard if you say day one, because you don't know how a person is from day one. You're not going to know how a person is until they're older and have been raised by their parents, by their teachers, by their friends, by all these different factors that come into play. So it's going to be a mix of what is currently coming in now and the past. And this formulates whole new things. That's what keeps the becoming happening over and over again, is that they're constantly feeding all these new things into it. Just like with the thinking question. Formulating all these different thoughts and ideas and opinions about this or that, you're constantly feeding something new to arise. So I think it's going to be a mix.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism is not deterministic. No. It's not, this person wasn't like that from day one. They did develop those qualities throughout their life. Another thing I wanted to say just quickly is, day one is actually a bit of is not early enough, actually, because they're already developing in the womb. There was an interesting study done about babies in the womb, that when they came out, when they were first born, they would cry in the accent of their parents, because they had heard the sound, the voice of their mother, and they would cry in that accent, according to that accent. And the study went on and on about the various things, based on the foods that the parents ate while they were in the womb, based on the stress or relaxation of the parents, and so on. The other thing I wanted to say, I don't know if Palanyani has anything you can add after, is that karma, I don't think we should understand karma to be something magical, like you kill someone and then in the next life you're going to be killed. It's pretty clear that the Buddha tried to point this out as well. He said sometimes a person can do a very simple negative act and go to hell for it. Someone can do a lot of horrible deeds and not go to hell for it. The Buddha said, I see this. I see how some people do a lot of bad deeds and still in the end possible that they could even wind up in heaven. And a person could do a very trifling evil deed and still wind up in hell. Part of this is because of course because of the nature of how the mind takes it. If someone does a lot of bad deeds and then is remorseful and sees the danger in it, or the harm in what they've done, and strives to change themselves, they can overcome it and they can end up becoming a good person and actually blocking out the karma or reducing it or so on. And of course this is a controversial subject of whether you can actually cut off karma or so on. But the other part of it is that, first of all, karma is only one of the forces at work in the universe, and second of all, karma is natural. It's a part of nature. It only talks about the inclination or the tendency, or the effect, the addition that an act will put into the pot, right? But when you have all these different factors at play, this one act may not appear to have a negative consequence at all. It's like if you put salt into a dish, it still may turn out that the dish doesn't taste salty at all, depending on what else is in the dish. And when you taste it, you may not notice the salt. It may not be the first thing that you notice. There may be so much sugar that it actually tastes sweet. And it may be that there's so much water that you can't actually taste the salt. However, the many different factors, it can also happen that the salt reacts with something and turns into something totally different. Obviously, the obvious answer to your question is that yes, that person's probably done some pretty good things to be born a genius or an angel or so on. Why some children are angelic, some other children are terrors, and seems to have nothing to do with their upbringing and nothing to do with their parents, even their genetics or so on. In certain cases, why different children act. Some children come out of the womb and aren't crying at all. Some of them cry all night. Some cry when they get in the car. My brother and I were like this. My older brother, the only way they could put him to sleep was to get him in the car and drive him around. As soon as I got in the car, I would start wailing and crying, and I hated to be in the car. Totally different. My older brother, 2 years separated. And this kind of thing surely has to do with some karmic or some inherent qualities they call vasana. Vasana means those things that you carry with you, or that you bring from one life to the next. But it doesn't have to be totally that way. Things can twist and turn in all sorts of ways. It's just the way physics works, or how science works. It happens quite scientifically. This is why the Buddha said karma is something that you really can't understand. Only a Buddha could possibly understand and know what deed leads to what result, and what has led this person to be like this, and so on. Very difficult to see. I mean, it's an example is how difficult it is to predict the weather 7 days in advance. Just so many different factors to consider. But simple answer is yeah, it most likely has to do with their samsaric training, but not entirely. And as Nagasena pointed out quite correctly, people can take lemons and make lemonade. People with bad lives can turn out to be great people. And people with great lives can turn out to be bad people. And people can change. There's an example as the Tamya Jataka. Tamya came from hell and was born a prince in the same kingdom where he had been a king. And so he had been a terrible person before he had gone to hell. But as a result of that, he realized that he had to do something to change himself, or else he was going to grow up and be the king again and start killing people. So he was sitting on his king's lap when he was 6 months old or 3 months old, and they brought these prisoners to the king, and the king said, chop off that man's head, give this man 10 lashes, and excommunicate this man, or whatever, so take all his money, throw him in the dungeon, torture him. And this baby, who was the Bodhisattva, became quite scared. There was an angel there in the king's umbrella, the white umbrella, and the angel told him that it was his fate or something to become the king. And he got totally scared, and the angel said, but if you pretend to be deaf, and if you pretend to be dumb, they won't make you king. They'll cast you away, and you won't have to become king, and then you won't have to do all sorts of bad deeds and go to hell again. And so, thinking about hell, it was like he was still young enough to remember it. He hadn't gone through the horrors of being a young child and forgetting about all that. And so he took this to heart, and from that point on, if you read the Tamya Jataka, it's wonderful to hear. They thought, this baby doesn't cry out. Well, is there something wrong with him? Maybe he's mute. And so they put lots of sweets around, and the Bodhisattva thought to himself, if I cry for those sweets, I'm going to wind up in hell. And so he wouldn't take the sweets. And so they tried to starve him and make him cry, and he said, and he felt so much hunger, but he thought to himself, the pain of hell is far worse than the pain of this hunger, so he forbore with it. And for 16 years they tested him again and again and again, thinking there's nothing wrong with him, the doctors came and said he's perfectly fine, and so on. But for 16 years you can say he took a very bad situation that he had got himself into and turned it around, made some new good, excellent karma. And in the end they threw him out. They decided they were going to kill him. So they sent him off with his caretaker, to be hit over the head and put in a shallow grave and buried there. He says this son is useless. He's inauspicious, and he's going to create trouble for the kingdom. So when he gets to the forest, he stands up, tests out his strength, find out he still can move, he's still strong, and he says to the guy, he says, thanks for taking me here. You can go home now. The guy looks up, and who's that? Who are you? He didn't ever see him talk before. And he says, I'm your prince. I've decided not to become a king. I'm going to go forth. And so he sends him back home and goes off and becomes an ascetic. Then the whole kingdom follows him, and eventually they all become ascetics. This is the Temiya Jataka, very famous. Point being, he takes a very bad situation, even bad karma, you might say, and turns it into a wonderful thing, and now it winds up being emptying a whole kingdom and turning them all into ascetics, instead of following his karma and becoming king again and carrying on the horrible tradition of his father.
I don't have anything to add to that.